I'm Bev Clough. I'm a trustee of the SLSA and a member of the executive board. I'm really pleased to be speaking today to Professor Caroline Hunter from the University of York. And Caroline won the SLSA Prize for contributions to the socio-legal community in 2021. So hello, Caroline. It's a real pleasure to talk to you today.
Hello, it's my pleasure to speak to you.
So I've just got a few questions to talk to you about today, really covering your research and thinking about your reflections on socio-legal studies. So firstly, I think it would be really good to hear a little bit from you about your research. So how you define your research interests and kind of, where you've focused research so far.
Yeah, so my interest is in housing. And I guess as a lawyer, you get at it in different ways. So sometimes it's the public law end of things. So particularly I've done work on homelessness and decision-making in homelessness and appeals and so on. But sometimes it's the property end of things. And I'm interested in tenancies, how people lose their tenancies, stuff on long leasehold. It's the most recent thing I did in terms of funded work. So it's a really broad take on what is housing, I would say.
That's fascinating. And could you talk a little bit about your route into that area of research, and what is it about housing that's got you interested in the kind of social legal side of it?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer completely. When I did my LLB, I thought I'm not interested in the things that other people are interested in, which is mostly going off to work for big companies in the city on company law and that sort of thing. I thought, gosh, I'm not interested in that at all. So I wasn't really thinking of being a lawyer. So I went to do a diploma in housing administration. Now I can't quite tell you why housing, apart from I had some links in it through my family. My mother did some work in housing. So I just went and did this postgraduate diploma, and my first job, proper job, was doing housing advice in London, and that was great. But through that I found lawyers who were interested in housing, and I decided to go back to being a lawyer as opposed to doing advice and so on. So I did the bar course and ended up as a barrister working with Andrew Arden, and that was great, but I'd never really planned to be a barrister, and I don't think I was that good at it. I mean, I was very good at bits of it, but I didn't really like doing the court work. And I did a bit of teaching at the same time with the LSE, teaching their housing students the housing law bit, and I absolutely loved doing that. With Andrew, I also did a lot of writing, and I enjoyed doing that. So it seemed sensible to think about, I like writing, I like teaching, how about academic work? So I applied for a job at Hallam, well, it wasn't called that, but Sheffield Hallam University, in their department, now what it was called then, I think it was Urban Studies or something like that. It's always changing its name, and teaching on their housing courses. So I was working with lots of different people, social policy people, economics, and that was really exciting to be the lawyer with those people. So that's how I got into it. I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, really interesting route. Could you talk perhaps a little bit about how socio-legal studies has been a part of that research?
Yeah. So I think if you're in a department that is not full of lawyers, you think very differently about the law, because you've got people who are saying, well, this is what happens in legal practice, in particularly in housing, you know, people who get evicted, this is, you know, their real experience of it. And so you think about it slightly differently, I think. So I think my approach, although I've written stuff which is very doctrinal, you know, here are all the cases on homelessness and so on, my research end and working with other people at Hallam was always very much a socio-legal research, and I guess I've never really thought of it as something different.
And it seems a really important area, and I think particularly at the moment. What are your plans with your research next? What are you currently working on, and where are you going with it next?
Oh goodness! So at the moment, I'm thinking about the private rented sector. So I've written a little bit about that, and I'm hoping to get some funding. We'll see. We've got a bid in at the moment at the last stages, so it may or may not get funded. Yes, thank you. But even if it's not, that's where I'm thinking at the moment, and particularly at the bottom end of the private rented market, but also something on students. I'm doing a paper at the moment on student housing, particularly the sort of move to having private halls that have, I guess many of us will have seen them in our university towns. Across, you know, so much has been built over the last 10-15 years, and how they who makes those decisions that they should happen, but also how they're regulated. So that's where I'm at the moment.
Well, best of luck with the funding application for that. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how you've been involved in the SLSA and your kind of contributions to the SLSA, but also to socio-legal studies more broadly.
So I was trying to remember, when did I go to my first SLSA conference? Because that's where you start really, and making friends, I would say, but also colleagues. It was sometime in the early 90s, and I'd just come to Nottingham, to the law school there, and I think the year before they'd had the SLSA conference, and everybody there was saying, oh, it's really good, you should go. And I knew nothing about it because I hadn't been in a law school, and I went, and goodness, I can't even remember where it was, but I met people there who I've worked with ever since. So people like Dave Cowan, Helen Carr, and what I found was a community which, particularly when I'd been at Hallam, I was with people who were always doing housing, and I had a community there. You go into law school and you find actually there's nobody else who's interested in housing. So you're sort of on your own. So I always actually continued to work with people at Hallam, but I also met other housing lawyers in different universities who I then also worked with. So I guess it was really important for me to meet people who were working in the same area, who had the same interests. So that's how I got involved. And then for various, I was just a member for quite a while. And at some point I became a member of the committee, and I also was involved in the Manchester conference, helping with that, and that was the first time I was involved with the conference. And then I was the main organizer, the one in 2013, and then we did it again this year, wasn't it? Gosh, yes, 2022 at York. So that was our second time of doing it at York, and it's always been it's a lot of work, but really enjoyed organising it and getting an exciting bunch of people in together and hearing what people are doing.
Yeah, it's no mean feat at all, organising a conference, so to be involved in it 3 times, that's a tricky one. So just thinking about your career, have there been any standout moments during that career so far?
Yes, so I think the standout work I've done, or most exciting in some ways, was work on antisocial behaviour. So that started, gosh, more than 20 years ago. It became an issue, I would say, and the government got very interested in it. And we did some work for the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, but that we also did some work both for the different departments of the government at various points, and that went on for probably 10 years, that work on and off. And we had some really interesting things that happened through that. So, for example, one of the most exciting, was it exciting? It was interesting when our research was negatively talked about by David Blanket on the radio, and we had a lot of people, a lot of journalists then coming and wanting to talk us about it, partly because he was very negative about research in universities, and so that was quite an interesting experience, I guess, as an academic. Is suddenly journalists are very interested in what you're saying, and then we had another interesting experience with the Home Office, where the person who had commissioned the work then wanted to be very negative about it because she didn't like some of our findings, and again, you realize the limits of what you can do when you're working for the government, when they don't like what you've got to say.
Yeah, it seems a real challenge to try and navigate how your research findings are then understood and received by politicians, by funders, by the public. So just thinking also about challenges. So what do you think are the challenges ahead for the social legal studies and the community?
Well, I think, the community has grown hugely since I started. So when I moved into a law school in the mid-90s, there was a real divide between those who were very much doctrinal lawyers and those of us who were doing socio-legal. And I think we've all seen that over the last 30 years, more and more academics are doing socio-legal work in various very different ways, and it's become much more mainstream. And I suspect when the next ref results come out, we'll see that a lot of the work that people have put in was socio-legal work. So it's really changed, and that's a real positive, I think, that we we don't see that big divide that everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people see, that actually you have to think about law in a range of ways, some of which are doctrinal, but then you have to put that into other contexts. It can't be enough. But one of the things that's really changed for me is, and I say this as somebody who doesn't have a PhD, who went it from practice, as it were, is that the divide between practice and academic work has got wider. And I think that's is it a problem? I think it probably might be a problem, just in having that understanding of what lawyers do in their day-to-day work. So in housing, you know, what's really important is what the advice they give, what happens in courts and so on. And I think we got further and further away of understanding that in the academic world, and I think that's a shame in some ways, and that people coming from practice bring something to their research. So and I think one of the things that I think, you know, ESLC, I know, suggest is that people have internships, and I think we should try and encourage people to send, you know, to use those opportunities to actually go and work in solicitors, as barristers, whatever it might be, to just really understand the day-to-day work of lawyers.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and I think it's something, you know, for another day, not for now, but it would be really good to think about actually how that divide has happened. And I wonder if part of that is to do with, you know, people needing a PhD in academia now, and it almost drives you down a particular direction, and how we can remedy it, I think, will be really interesting to talk about another time. Yeah, so on that note, I think, do you have any words of wisdom for the socio-legal community?
Oh, I'm not sure I've got wisdom, but what I would say is to people is the SLSA for me has been a really big part of my career in all sorts of different ways, but mostly by finding a home for my work and colleagues and friends to work with. And I think this model of a lone researcher has gone, and largely I think that's a very good thing. But in order to have work with other people, you have to find those colleagues, that network, and the SLSA for me has been that network. And it's, you know, you want to be challenged, but you also want to feel it's your home. And for me, that's been a really important part of my career.
Fantastic. So thank you very much again for taking the time to talk to me today, and huge congratulations again for the very well-deserved award for the contributions to the socio-legal community. It was really great to talk to you.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.